Ian Lipton. Hello. You look like you're at the cottage. Hi, Carlos.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, Sally, I hear you went for a nice walk with Debbie the other day. That was lovely to hear about that and some of your suggestions. Thank you. Hey, Carlos, our newest member of our facilitation team. Lovely to
Yeah.
see you. Hi.
Good to hear.
Excited. That's great. Hey, Mary. Modivo, what time is it for you?
1 a.m.
1 a.m. My goodness.
Yep.
Thank you for spending your, I was going to say Saturday evening, but I guess Sunday morning
No.
with us.
Sunday morning. Yeah. Sunday
Definitely morning. Yeah.
Yeah. Good to see you guys.
Good to see you.
Great to see you.
Oh, David, looking ever young.
Hi, Debbie. And Audrey and Mark, both here from Ireland. Welcome. Hello. Teresa, nice to sort of see you. Hi, Richard. Oh. And
Yes, hi everyone. Sorry you can't see me. I am on transit, but I'm with you.
No,
It's all good.
All good, Teresa. Netiamu, lovely to see you. Hello from Kenya.
Hello, how's everybody?
Good. It feels like it's been too long.
Yeah, it's been too long.
Yeah. Hey, Mark. Sorry about all that smoke we keep sending down your way, Mark. Hi, Lister.
You know, all I hear is people complain out east because most of my relatives are East Coast. And, but between Alberta and Quebec, you guys aren't being very nice neighbors, man. I'll tell you.
Well, I promise you, it's not intentional. We're lamenting as much as you are. For sure. Not good. Hi, Stephanie. Welcome. It's nice to see you. I was just saying welcome to Carlos, and the two of you are our two newest recruits for the facilitation team. So really lovely to have you both here today, and really excited about that new adventure.
Hello.
That's fun. Hi.
Hi.
Swati here from India. Welcome.
Hi, how are you?
Hi. It's nice to see you again.
Nice
Lovely.
to see you too.
All right. Well, I know that there were upwards of 50 of us registered, so I know we're not all here yet, but I think that we should get going because we have a pretty packed agenda here today. And I'm delighted to see all of these faces, some of whom I haven't seen for a while. It's always too long. And it's astounding to me that we are already in June, halfway through 2023. And our second quarterly alumni event for the year. And this time we have a guest speaker who I am absolutely delighted to introduce to you all. I don't think anybody from her pod is here, so and it's an introduction for all of you. Erika Bolstad is here with us today, and she has many accomplishments that distinguish her. And I'm just going to mention just a little smattering to scratch the surface. She is quite an esteemed daughter, sister, wife, aunt, which I really can relate to and is important to me also. And I consider her a friend. She joined us back in Pod 8 in 2021, in the fall of 2021. And we had the delight, I think, of participating in Module 1 together back then. She's also a well-respected climate journalist and has published several articles in various newspapers and magazines. And most recently, she has published her first book. So congratulations, Erika. The book is called Windfall, and it's part memoir, part invitation to grapple with our humanness and what it means to be alive during a global climate crisis. And so she's agreed very graciously to be with us here today to talk a little bit about some of those themes in her book and what that's meant. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what that means for us. So welcome, Erika. It's really lovely to have you. Thank you so much for agreeing to come and speak about your book. I read it and have loved it, and can't wait to hear what you have to say. So welcome.
Well, thank you so much. This is just such a pleasure to be here. I am going to hide myself view now. Hold on, if I can. Okay. Or I'm going to change it so that I can see everyone. Here we go. There we go. That's better. Okay, got the whole gallery so I can see everybody's faces. Well, thank you so much. I joined the Common Earth program of the Module 1 in right after I finished this book. And so I don't know how many of you are familiar with the book publishing process itself, but there's often a big gap between when you finish the book and when the book comes out. And in my case, it was about 14 months. And there's stuff that happens. You're editing the book, you are, with your editor, there's, you'll get sent, here's the cover, what it looks like. And you have to make some decisions about things. But there's a gap. And in that gap, I really wanted to think about some of the messages that I had in the book, some of the content of the book, and how I would talk about it out in the world. And I came upon Common Earth and I thought, oh, this is perfect. This is the kind of how I need to sort of be thinking about the communication around my book, how to talk to other people about it, about the ideas that I wanted to convey in it. And so, it was ideally an ideal program, in part because in the process of writing Windfall, I came to understand that I really did want to have better tools for communicating around the themes, the climate themes of the book in particular. And one of the really important things that I took away from Common Earth is that it is up to us to envision the world we want to live in. This was a very important takeaway for me. It seems so obvious now looking back, but for me, it was one of the most important takeaways, that we built the world that we live in now, or the people that came before us did. And it's up to us to envision the world that we want to live in, and most importantly, how we want to make that happen. And so I've been thinking about that a lot. And one of the things that I wanted to do is start out this presentation with just a brief land acknowledgement. This is something that, for those of you from North America, are probably pretty familiar with this concept of land acknowledgements and territory acknowledgements. And I wanted to just start out with that because that's a very important theme of the book, a very important part of the book, where we come from and who came before us and who will come after us. And so I just want to invite all of you for a moment, and I've come to this from a North American perspective, so it might be a little different if you're joining us from other parts of the globe. But here, many of us are recent arrivals, especially in Canada and in the United States. And I just want you to maybe for a moment consider what it means to reside on the occupied homelands of Indigenous communities. Just for a moment, consider that. And even if you're not fully certain of the exact tribes or people that may have lived there before you, or that live there now with you in your community, I just would like you to, for a moment, to acknowledge that and think about it a little bit, and consider how those who came before us cared for the places that we're in now, and how Indigenous people continue to care for them and have in many places continually had that care and that love for place and for home, and then maybe just how those who come after us will continue to care for and connect to their homeland. And because we're from so many different places, I thought I would offer just something kind of general that we all, for a moment, just consider that sense of place and home and what it means for all of us. So one of the things that I found was very, very difficult after maybe during the Common Earth module and also in in the writing of this book is that this idea of cognitive dissonance. And Sarah did ask me to talk about this because I think it's a really important thing that we all have to grapple with. We do have to live in the world that exists as it exists now, not the one that we imagine or hope for. And so we do have to be in this place. And this can be very difficult for a lot of reasons, because it's frustrating, for one, because a lot of us often see solutions or a world, a much more equitable world that we envision, and we have a lot of steps to get there, and so it can be frustrating sometimes. It can be anxiety provoking and cause us a sense of gloom sometimes, because we're not really sure what the future holds and what our part is in that future. And so this is something that I hope to kind of address a little bit, and I think we're going to all talk about it a little bit later in some small groups. But I thought first I'd tell you a little bit about how the book came about, which is that it started in 2009 at the height of the Great Recession here in the United States. And this was also the height of the Bakken oil boom in North Dakota, and kind of the moment where fracking was becoming a big part of the American and North American economy. And in 2009, the Bakken region of North Dakota, in particular in North America, was one of the few places where the economy was growing, and there were jobs. There was this sense of expansion and hopefulness in these places, and in a few other like oil patch states in the United States, and of course in Canada, where fracking was really taking off. But there was also a real worry on the part of environmentalists and a lot of other people that it was really problematic, in particular in the United States, for the Obama administration to be relying on the fracking boom to prop up the economy, that it would have long-lasting consequences, and of course it did. So I want you to maybe, pause for a moment and think about that act of cognitive dissonance too. We have this president in the United States who is a person who exemplifies a lot of hope and change and possibility, and at the same time is very much reliant on, in this presidency, on a form of energy that is deeply destructive, not only in the moment while it is being extracted, but in the future. And so this administration had a very, very deep cognitive dissonance. We want to you can think about that a little bit, that it may not be the impression that you had at the time of that presidency, but they were very dependent on the boom in Texas, in North Dakota, in Wyoming and Colorado and Pennsylvania, the shale oil fracking in Pennsylvania, or the shale gas fracking in Pennsylvania. And so this was sort of a widespread contradiction that we were all living. Here we are in this deeply dark economic time, and yet, this is the thing that is going to pull us out of it. And I do want to take a quick step back, and I'm pretty sure that all of you are familiar with fracking. Yes, there we go. It is. I had that. I was like, there might be some terms here that I should talk about. But fracking is kind of an all-encompassing term that I and a lot of lay people use, not necessarily particularly in the industry, to describe what is the practice of shooting a cocktail of sand and chemicals beneath the earth, often very deep beneath the earth. And fracking is often done, what we call fracking is often done by sending very deep pipes down a mile or two and then horizontally. And so it is those pipes, those drills are used to send all that cocktail of sand and chemicals to break apart hard rock formations. So, and from that, they're able to extract the petroleum and natural gas from deep beneath the earth, from formations that are not necessarily what we might think of as traditional oil and gas, where you like send a pipe down into the earth and pull up from a pool like a straw. That's called conventional drilling. So fracking is differentiated by these much newer techniques. And this was very big in 2009. The oil companies were perfecting these techniques and getting better and better at them, and it was getting cheaper and cheaper to drill. And that's when my mother inherited some mineral rights from a grandmother that she never knew, this woman named Anna, who filed for a homestead claim in 1905 in northwestern North Dakota. And to position this self in the context of the earth, this is just south of the Canadian border and just east of the Montana state line. So I'm not sure that many of you are familiar with that part of the country. It's a pretty lonely stretch of the world and sparsely populated. And if you're not familiar with mineral rights, a quick explainer on those two, the US is one of the few places in the world where individuals can own what's beneath the earth, the minerals like oil and gas and uranium and other minerals that are beneath the earth, where individuals can actually own them, not the sovereign state or nation. And it varies in the United States from place to place, from state to state. But in much of the central and western United States, sometimes the people who own the surface of the land are different from the people who own the subsurface. Those can be separated. And that was the case in my family. My great-grandmother, that is, Anna, she homesteaded this land in 1905. And another term that may be unfamiliar if you're not from this part of the world either is his homesteading was a part of US history where people could get 160 acres of nearly free land. There was a filing fee for it. And if you lived on it for long enough, usually about 5 years, you could claim title to that land. And that is what my great-grandmother did. We didn't know a lot about her because she disappeared from both the historical record and from a lot of family stories. We only knew a little bit about her. So in 2009, out of the blue, my mother gets a check from an oil company, and it was for $2,400, and it was an offer to lease her mineral rights. So this, not the land, because my family had sold the land in the 1970s, but kept the mineral rights. And so she gets an offer from an oil company. They want to lease that land, and they pay her $2,400 to lease it so that they have the right to drill for oil there. So when this happened, my mother was completely surprised, and so were her brother and two half sisters who also inherited these mineral rights. They were surprised. A lot of people in these oil patch states in the United States were surprised when this happened. And because many of them left during the Dust Bowl years, during the Great Depression of the 1930s, a lot of these places emptied out. And so my family left, much of them left. And my grandfather held on to the land for a while, but then sold it in the 1970s when he retired. And my mother got this check, and she was absolutely delighted. Like, this was what is often called mailbox money. So a lot of people who have these mineral rights will get a check out of nowhere. And how many of us really turn down a check out of nowhere, free money? You know, it's really hard to question when like $2,400 shows up in your mailbox that you didn't anticipate or know you were going to get, or even know that you were entitled to. And she was delighted. And she really believed in kind of the American promise that anyone could get rich. She grew up in that era and really sort of believed it. And her father, my grandfather, believed it too. It's one of the reasons why he held on to those mineral rights when he sold the land. He kind of hoped that there would be oil there someday. And also, the $2,400 showed up in 2009 at a time when my parents really needed the money. My mother was in poor health, and she owed about $72,000 in medical debt from thanks to our American healthcare system. But also she was in poor health, and $2,400 it wasn't life-changing money, but it was welcome. It was definitely welcome money at a time when the economy was really bad. And both of my parents were, were getting older, but they didn't qualify yet for Medicare, which is the healthcare program in the United States for people over 65. And so this was expensive, and they were, also suffering economically from the effects of the Great Recession. My father was a woodworker and artist, and nobody buys that kind of stuff during a recession. So at the time, I lived in Washington, D.C., and I was working for a big newspaper chain that owned a bunch of newspapers around the United States, and I covered environmental issues for that newspaper chain. And I was really skeptical. I was super skeptical of what showed up in my mother's mailbox, even though I fully understood how welcome that money was. I had all these questions about fracking and what it meant to profit from our family, to profit from an oil and gas boom, even in a very small way. I really wondered about that. And I really wanted to know more. I kept a little file on my desk and on my computer of anytime I would see an article about fracking or about North Dakota, I would, just put it in there and set it aside. And my mother died in 2010 of heart disease. And it took me a couple of years to kind of, for my life to sort of stabilize a little bit after the Great Recession as well. But I really wanted to find out more about these mineral rights. And my father still owned them, and someday they would be mine and my sister's. And so I went to North Dakota. I went to find out. I couldn't get my boss to approve a trip for me to go write about it as a journalist. And so I just took a week of vacation, and I cobbled together all these frequent flyer miles and, some vacation time. And I went to North Dakota to find out more. And it was just a sort of mind-blowing experience. My very first day, I started seeing flares, and many of you who live near or around oil patch places are probably familiar with the sight of a flare, which is natural gas that's burning. It's just burning off into the atmosphere because the oil companies, it's much more profitable to pull out the petroleum and sell that than it is to capture the natural gas and sell it. And in North Dakota at the time, there was not a lot of infrastructure for capturing that gas. So there, my very first day researching this book, I'm seeing climate change happening right in front of me, like literally burning there on the prairie. These big flares, burning, methane just being released into the atmosphere. And it was a huge eye-opening moment for me personally, because until then, I don't think I had a super personal connection to climate change. I had experienced some serious hurricanes living in Florida, and I covered Hurricane Katrina when I worked for the Miami Herald. I wrote about it from New Orleans. And those were things that have always happened, of course, but that are intensifying now. And until then, though, I had not seen it right in front of me or happening to me in a way that I was deeply connected to. My family had mineral rights on land where oil companies potentially could be drilling for oil and gas and causing these fires that I was seeing right in front of me. And so it started to become personal in a way that maybe it wasn't before. And so that very first trip to North Dakota, I was there to find out more about oil and gas, of course, and the flaring and my family's mineral rights, and also about Anna, this mysterious great grandmother who nobody really knew much about in my family. So from my research, I learned that Anna, that her husband committed her to the state asylum, so the insane asylum, right after their baby was born, and that's my grandfather. And this was a huge sort of like, we had some hints of that in the family history, but we didn't really know for sure. And so in North Dakota, I got a lot of family records. I was able to do a lot of research, and I was able to go to the state hospital and get a file on Anna that explained what had happened to her. It was a 15-page file that offered up a lot of information that no one in my family ever knew about what had happened to this ancestor. And over the course of 10 years, I'll skip a big part of it, but I went back and forth to North Dakota about 12 times over 10 times over 8 years. And then in the last 2 years, I've been back 3 times to do research and also to film what I was doing, because I'm now making a short a 10-minute documentary in connection with the book. And, in that time, I really grew to understand my family's connection to fracking. From that first day where I saw the flares, I began to understand that my family was connected to climate change in a very visceral way from these lines that were drawn on a map in 1905 when my great-grandmother claimed this land under the Homestead Act. And if you're not very familiar with the Homestead Act and their equivalents in Canada too, this was a larger federal policy in the United States that started during the Civil War to settle what were considered vacant lands at the time. And of course, we all know that these were not vacant lands. These were lands where people lived and had lived for, thousands of years. And so over the course of writing the book, I really began to understand that concept and that connection. I began to connect that thread of my family's connection to this land, to this place, and also began to understand that, it didn't start in 1905 with those lines on the map. It went back much further. Other people had strong connections to this place long before my great-grandmother and my great-grandparents showed up there. And so, over the course of time, I began to understand that the book I would write would be about connecting those lines, that line from 1905 to the present, but then also, also before that too. And, as I said, there is this cognitive dissonance, this we live in this world that exists now because of these lines that were drawn on maps, 100 years ago. And I really had a lot of time in this part of the world. There is a lot of what they call windshield time, which is just distances are vast, and to get to and from places, you have to sometimes drive 2 or 3 hours just in the course of, doing normal things. And I had a lot of time to think and to kind of start to put together these dots. So I thought what I would do is read a little bit from a chapter of the book about cognitive dissonance, a very specific point. And this is an excerpt from a chapter called Hydrocarbons. And it is set in 2016, which is when I went back to North Dakota after a year or so away. I hadn't been there for a while, a little bit longer than that, maybe 2 years. And at the time, I was writing for a publication called E&E News, which covers environment and energy issues. And I went there to do some stories for that publication about the consequences of climate change in North Dakota, a place where people were seeing a lot of prosperity from this oil boom, but could not admit that it was because the thing that was, putting food on their table and heating their homes and putting away money for college for their children was having a long-term consequence, that it was causing climate change, it was contributing to climate change, and it was being willfully ignored. And I wanted to write about that a little bit and to understand it a little bit. And so there's a reference in this passage to Julie Lefevre, who is was a scientist, an influential geologist in North Dakota. And I'll begin with, Nearly everyone I interviewed danced around the dissonance. 2 of the city commissioners I interviewed sold flood insurance and had to rebuild their own homes after a 2011 inundation, but they told me they didn't think humans had anything to do with climate change. Even the state's climatologist told me that climate change was, quote, a subjective topic. He said he thought that a warmer North Dakota meant a future where farmers could take advantage of the longer growing season by growing more valuable crops such as corn. It seemed impossible that the state's own climatologist couldn't acknowledge the role of humans in shaping the weather of the future. Eventually, I stopped asking the people I interviewed in North Dakota whether they believed in climate change. Instead, I began asking them what they were doing about flooding or extreme heat and drought. Even if they didn't acknowledge that the planet was warming or that people and fossil fuels were responsible, they couldn't deny the consequences of climate change or the need to adapt to what was happening right in front of them. It was an imperfect way of acknowledging reality, I knew, but most people in North Dakota were too tied to the industry to answer the question honestly. Nearly everyone had connections to oil and gas, even if their families didn't receive regular royalty checks. Beyond the people with high-paying jobs in the oil fields, there existed a secondary economy to service the workers, whether they were in retail, restaurants, construction, or a daycare center or a car dealership. All those people and businesses paid taxes, which helped support towns and municipal services. The vicious codependent circle had no end in an economy dominated by oil and gas. The entire state benefited from the boom, even in more liberal enclaves like Fargo, where people were more likely to worry about the consequences of climate change. The state built better roads with production tax money and collected from oil companies. The universities improved their campuses with multi-million-dollar core sample libraries and other investments. The Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara Nation built new tribal government offices and an interpretive and history center, and issued regular disbursements to enrolled members from oil revenue. Towns like Williston built palatial recreation centers with sales taxes from all the new arrivals who were buying goods and services. Federal money helped too. Williston built a brand new $273 million airport, subsidized with a federal aviation fund. Minot also spent $84 million expanding its airport, including a new terminal building. But it was a volatile prosperity for North Dakota, the second largest oil producing state in the country. Unlike Texas, which has a diversified economy better able to weather busts, North Dakota was overly dependent on a single industry. Nothing illustrated the turbulence of an extractive economy like the Minot airport. In the 3 years since I'd first arrived at the tiny airport in search of Anna's story, oil prices dropped from $97.18 per barrel to $22.72 per barrel. In 2013, when I first arrived, there were 13 flights per day in and out of Minot. 3 years later, the shiny new terminal was mostly empty when I flew out of it. There were just 3 flights a day now, all because of the declining price of oil. I didn't live in North Dakota or depend on oil for a living. At the end of my trip, I could fly home to Washington, D.C., leaving the cognitive dissonance half a continent away. Yet I too was a product of capitalism. Although I couldn't be certain, I suspected that if the mineral rights were more valuable, if my family were sitting on one of the gushers that Julie Lefevre told me about, the money could have swayed me too. It's possible I would have turned a blind eye to climate change and been even more aggressive about pursuing the windfall my grandfather dreamed of when he signed that first lease in 1951. So I don't know how I would have reacted if the check had been, for $2.4 million instead of $2,400. I don't know, right? I don't think a lot of us know the answer to that. I really hope that I would have thought about it quite a bit. And there are a lot of people who do think about the consequences of the checks that they do. But since then, I have wondered over and over again, why us? Why my family? Why did we get these mineral rights? These weren't big checks, but they did mean that we benefited from a century of environmental destruction and greed and oppression. Because an oil boom comes with all kinds of consequences, and those consequences, those extractive consequences didn't start with an oil boom. An oil boom is just the most recent manifestation of, in the United States, of federal policy that encouraged settlement in places that did not belong to the people who were arriving there. So over the course of my research, I really started to think about that a lot, the consequences, where this came from. Why? Just because I have this great grandmother that no one knew really, knew her story. Why did we have this check coming to us? Why did anyone have these checks coming to them? And I really thought about it a lot. And I decided in the end, I don't want to spoil the end of the book too much for people who haven't read it yet, but I did decide in the end that that those mineral rights, that they need to go back in some way. And I haven't quite found the right word to describe what I'm talking about. It's like a return or a ceding or it's not, I haven't quite found the right word. So if anyone has a suggestion, please let me know. But I also started to, like a lot of us, become more familiar with the land back movement in North America, which is a movement to consider giving back either the like ownership of land and places to Indigenous people, or the management of those places to Indigenous people. So in the United States, there's quite a bit of discussion about a real discussion around tribal management of a lot of wilderness places or national parks or that kind of thing. And this is becoming a mainstream movement. And I think this is important for everyone that is associated with this organization to understand, because I think in Common Earth, we talk a lot about like what our individual actions mean and how they can collectively add up. And one of the things that I decided is that, I could give back these mineral rights, I could return them very specifically to the Assiniboine people who was there before my great-grandparents arrived. It was quite a bit of time before they arrived. All of the tribes that were living in that area of North Dakota were removed or sent to reservations in Montana, about 150 miles east, 100 miles east, or excuse me, west of this location. And so most of the descendants of the people who were there before my great-grandparents are now in Fort Peck, Montana. And I decided that's what I would try to do. It's way harder than you would imagine for lots of, there's some of them are logistical reasons. It's just difficult to do. And I detail it a little bit more in the book, but, and it's also philosophically kind of problematic and tricky because these mineral rights that my family owns, they've never been drilled on. The oil companies have sent us checks over the years to lease the land, but they've never exercised those leases. They've never actually gone and drilled on the land there. And so what I'm giving away has mostly symbolic value, not actual value. And so I've wondered, is that a gift or am I giving something that if it doesn't have value, what does that mean? And so I've begun having some of those conversations with tribal members about what that does mean. And from what I understand, it means a lot, actually, even if it is symbolic, that it matters. Because suddenly now there are people who have a long history of stewardship of that place and connection to that place that are able to make decisions and negotiate as sovereign nations, as tribal nations with oil companies, which makes it more difficult and a challenge for the oil companies, and which I like, make it a little bit harder for them to drill, make it more difficult. And so I realized that I'm just one person thinking about giving these mineral rights back. But I wrote it in this book, and since then a couple of people have approached me and saying, I have one woman say, I've already done that. I did it about 10 years ago. I gave away my mineral rights. And I was like, wow, how did you do it? Because I've been having, it's not been easy. And she explained how she did it. And I'm hoping she'll let me use her name in an article that I hope to publish about this. And then I've been in touch with this artist, Eliza Evans, who is in who owns some mineral rights in Oklahoma. And she's been doing this like really fun project where she has these mineral rights and she invites other people to own them, or she gives them away, and she's fractionalized the ownership of it so much on the title of the land that it's almost impossible for anyone to untangle now. And I love this like sort of cheeky kind of act of protest, it's just a really cool thing that she's doing. And she and I have talked a lot about like, if we're just two people doing these weird little things, maybe a handful of things, what does that matter? What does it matter? And then this is something that like I've thought about from David, who has talked us through quite a bit of difficult math in the past. And if you start to think about it and start to really look into it, there are in the United States about 12 million people who own mineral rights in some way, shape, or form. And most of those people, let's be honest, are going to be very happy to just take those checks and cash them. And, they're often very far removed from the literal consequences of drilling or, the consequences of having an oil boom arrive in your hometown. And they're just going to cash the checks. In fact, when I did an event at a bookstore right in the heart of North Dakota where this book takes place, the owner of the bookstore told me, I cashed the checks because I don't think this bookstore would make it without me cashing those checks. And I understand that. I understand that we do have to live in the world that we, that exists right now. But if you start to do the math, if even 1% of those 12 million people give up their mineral rights or talk about it, or that's a movement. That's 120,000 people. That is a movement. If 10% of people do it, that's like huge, right? What is that? 1.2 million people. That's a lot of people. And that has potential. And so even though this is small and the personal logistics of mine are kind of difficult because of the ownership, et cetera, and it's not always easy to work with a tribe. A tribe is made up of a lot of different people with various opinions. And I think about that in terms of the numbers, that if it's just one person, maybe other people will do it. And then maybe suddenly you have 1% of people doing it. And it looks in some ways bigger than it really is. And so I think that's where I'll leave you with that idea of that, even if it's a small thing that you're doing on a personal level, I have a slightly larger platform than the average person, but not huge. If I can write about this and continue writing about it more, I think others will probably, who maybe haven't even heard of this idea, who didn't really think about it, or who maybe thought, I have these mineral rights, I don't know what to do with them, I'm going to cash the checks for now. Maybe that'll change some minds. And that is, I think, the most hopeful and action-oriented thing I can think of in a world that, I haven't created. It's not the one that I built, but it starts to further the one that I want to see. So I think that's it. And I think maybe I wanted to open up to questions or.
That was fabulous. Thank you, Erika.
You're welcome.
You see all the clapping and enthusiastic nods here, but lovely to share your story of your journey and this vision of hope and where we can start to be building the world we want to see. So thank you for that. Are there any questions or comments from the audience here? Anna Karina.
Hi, thank you for sharing your story. I can just, it's not really a question, but just share something that for some years I have thinking about, which is just our right to own land. to actually own it. So it's just, I think it's a paradigm that somehow we developed. And yeah, I just wanted to bring that forth and to know what you think also about it, if somehow you have thought of it. Thank you very much.
I actually do think about that quite a bit, and I'll give you an example. So I want to write a kind of a long editorial for the New York Times opinion section for the climate opinion editor there. We've been talking about it, and I started with that idea. I started with the idea of like, get rid of land, get rid of 400 years of property ownership and law and common law and she's like, whoa. Wait. She's like, not that that's like not a radical and interesting idea, but give people something that they can grasp a hold of, which is kind of why in part I've settled on giving back the mineral rights. It is an imperfect solution that still relies on lines drawn on a map in 1905 and before. And however, I like to think that like if enough of those mineral rights are given back and get kind of tied up in complications, etc., and it becomes harder and harder for oil companies to access them, that in a way does away with that sort of idea of ownership of what's beneath the earth. But yes, and in fact, the film that I've made that's almost done, I was hoping to show it to all of you today, but my film editor had to go out of town, and so we still have like a day's worth of work left on it. That film is about sort of imagining a different way of mapping, imagining a different way of ownership, of just not even considering it ownership of the earth or the earth beneath us and the sky above us. Yeah.
Can't wait to see that. Mark, you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. My question is, do you have any insight into where North Dakota fits after the fracking boom and price collapse in states like Wyoming?
Yeah.
The United States ended up with like 50,000 wells uncapped. Most of them are incorporated as LLCs. They go bust, and taxpayers pay for the capping cost when they have the right administration in place. I live adjacent to North Dakota, but I don't know how good North Dakota was at enforcing bonding the wells so that they had to cap them at least, because most of them are just leaking natural gas now, and they leak quite a lot. At least in Wyoming's case, the state would have gone bust if they had to cap the wells that they happily leased.
Yeah, it is a huge problem. I do have a chapter in the book where I write a little bit about that, because one of the things I did in 2020, there was all of this federal money in the United States for, all kinds of paycheck protection programs, et cetera. Like just so much money was coming into places to keep the economy afloat. And in North Dakota, they spent a bunch of money on capping those old oil wells. And because I don't really want to I don't want to give North Dakota too much credit, but they have a pretty extensive data. They know where the wells are that are leaking. They know where they know exactly where each well is. And so they have a database of like abandoned wells, and they have pushed to get higher bonds on those wells so that if a company does, walk away from the well, which does happen quite a bit, that the taxpayers are, if not on the hook, aren't on the hook as much for reclaiming that well. And so I actually spent a day with a crew that was going out and capping old wells, and it was really tremendously instructive to see how that was done, because it's kind of like it's the same people who were drilling for oil, but they're put to work in a different way. And in August of 2020, that day that I spent with them on site, I spent 2 days out there. I really had this vision of a future, you know, where we could turn our economy into that kind of work, where that is the thing that we're doing, where we are creating jobs that are in green energy or that are in sustainable, you know, farming, or that are where we're doing that, where the same people who were doing the work of extraction are now involved in actually capping the wells and making this, you know, a better world. And I'm not as hopeful as I once was about it. However, there is a lot of money in recent legislation in the United States to work on that particular area, but it's still a huge problem. You know, we've had oil and gas drilling for gosh, what is it now? I can't remember when the first well was in just slipped out of my brain, in Pennsylvania, in the United States, for, you know, 150 years, and at least, and longer in some parts of the world, and like Azerbaijan. But there are wells in Pennsylvania and in California where like nobody knows where they are, what's happening with them, right? They're not on any like state database or anything like that. It is a mess out there. So places that had later oil booms, like North Dakota, definitely, you know, starting in 1950, they know where all the wells are. It's just a function of having the money to plug them. But yeah, it is a problem. It's a huge problem.
Thank you.
Arlene, nice to see you. What's your question or comment?
Yeah, I just don't quite understand how it works if one party owns the mineral rights and the other party owns the land.
Yeah.
Then how do the oil companies access the mineral rights if the party that owns the land doesn't want to allow them, or do they have no say in it? I just don't know how that works.
Oh man, it is complicated. And unfortunately, in almost other Pennsylvania, there's actually people have a little bit more leeway if they do not own if there's it's called severing the mineral rights from the surface rights. And in Pennsylvania, in the United States, you do have to have permission of the landowner. But in most other places, especially in the West and in the Midwest, in the Great Plains of the United States, you do not. The laws are written in a way that it's called the law of capture, and it's it stems from English common law, and the law is written from a perspective that people who want to go extract these resources, companies that want to do that, have the right to do it. And so the only way to stop it really in a place like North Dakota is if you own vast tracts of land, if you own in an area that, a big area where you have a say over everything that happens in that area, and you own both the surface rights and the mineral rights. And that's it doesn't really happen a lot. It's pretty uncommon. And so what the state has done in North Dakota and many other places is they've literally drawn these like kind of arbitrary grids on a map that say, this is a pool. This little grid on the map is one pool. And everything that's in that pool is kind of like a common pool that an oil company could come in if they got the leases, and if they sign leases in that pool, they can go in and drill. And landowners have very little say in like where, they have some say now, a little bit more than they used to, in where some of the equipment is sited, where the roads are put, etc. But yeah, in most places, it's truly unfortunate. You have almost no say if an oil company wants to drill there. Almost no say.
Okay, I'm hoping that we have time for 2 more questions and we can squeeze them in here before the top of the hour. So Milena, let's hear from you next.
Thank you. Firstly, Erika, that was thank you. That was incredibly impactful and very, very inspiring to listen to. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I recently had a talk with a guy, I don't know him very well, but he works in energy, and he his role, as I understood it, and I think actually his mom is Indigenous, and his role is to work with Indigenous groups up in northern BC, British Columbia, to kind of be the middleman, is my understanding, between them and the oil companies or the energy companies. And what I got really curious about in talking to him was that he definitely felt that he was speaking the Indigenous people of the tribes, like he was speaking, and not on their behalf, but like he had their interests at heart. But the interest was still to develop the land, develop the land. You know what I mean? And what really puzzled me was that he said, well, these groups are for it, but they're wanting to, of course, get as much out of it as possible. So it left me a little puzzled because, and maybe it's just because I'm very naive, but I thought that, in general, Indigenous people would, no, we don't want this. We want to, live more in balance with nature. And that's probably just kind of my fairy tale version here. So there was a complexity that kind of opened in my understanding. And I just love to hear your experience with that. If that makes sense to you.
Yes, it absolutely does. And I think you're describing a contradiction that like a juxtaposition that a lot of people have to live with. I'm not as familiar with kind of the way that Canada works in terms of who owns what beneath the surface and above the surface. But the example I can offer is in North Dakota in particular. There's examples of tribes that have gotten very wealthy from oil. One of them is the MHA tribe, the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara tribes in kind of the southern part of the state, and that includes a big patch of oil in North Dakota. And they couldn't say no. They just couldn't say no to this. They couldn't say no, even as like other tribes in the region were fighting the Keystone XL pipeline. We're fighting the Dakota Access pipeline at Standing Rock. And so there are these real contradictions and a cognitive dissonance there too, that is really I think that many of the tribes wrestle with as well. And in fact, there have been some very good books about what happened in North Dakota around some of that, some of those complications. And I think we're going to see more of those diverging viewpoints. And because when a check arrives in the mail, it's very hard to turn down, for one. And two, a lot of, some of the people in the MHA tribal leadership, described it at the time as well, we're going to take this money and we're going to use it for good. And we're going to use it to like uplift the people in our tribes so we're not dependent on natural resources anymore. And, one can hope that that's the outcome. I'm not sure that it is. I think the justification was, we are catching up and we deserve to be prosperous as well. And that is true, right? That is true, but it is also true that what the cost of it is very high to everyone on the planet. And then just up the road, not too far away in Montana, is the Fort Peck Reservation, where I was recently to talk to tribal elders about, my idea about reverting these mineral rights. And the oil boom completely passed them by, even though they are probably sitting on parts of some of the same geological formations that tribes in North Dakota are. And they're in some ways relieved, right? They're a little bit relieved that they didn't have to make those decisions, that they didn't have to make those choices. But they also are, kind of like looking at the new trucks and the jobs and the resources that their neighbors 100 miles away have. And I think that is, that's hard sometimes. But from what I understand, and the people that I've talked to, you know, it does give them like kind of a little bit of a moral high ground, you know, they have, they have been able to, like, you know, join in some of the protests against some of the pipelines from a very, you know, pure place, ideological place. There's that. I don't know. This is a really difficult one. This is one of those quandaries that we will have to wrestle with, and not just around fossil fuel energy. This is happening. These discussions are happening around renewable energy as well. And, you know, we are now talking about removing dams in the Pacific Northwest that are because of you know, what these dams have done to the salmon cycle in places. We are talking about you know, some indigenous groups and tribes in California and in Oregon and other parts of the West in the United States object to renewable energy projects for many reasons, including one that they maybe weren't consulted, which is by law what the federal government, what the state government is supposed to do, but also because of like the consequences of some of those projects too, that we maybe haven't fully thought out yet. We haven't seen, you know, what some of the consequences of those projects are as well. And even in my own book, the land where Anna, you know, had her homestead in 1905 is a very windy place that is perfect for wind turbines, wind farms. And yet it is also part of the North American flyway that sees like this incredible, you know, migration of birds every year. And there is an interaction between these wind turbines and the birds. And so we have lots of these consequences, you know, these complications. And yes, you know, lithium mining is also going to be a major a conversation that we are already having, not just in the United States and Canada, but in many parts of the world. And uranium mining is well established as, you know, as having so many issues in indigenous communities in North America. And so, yeah, I think we have to think through all of these things, the moral and ethical implications of our energy use, you know, whether they are fossil fuels or renewables. And I don't actually have good answers for that, other than that I think people need to be talking to each other about, you know, the consequences and how some of these projects can be done in a way that respects, you know, that respects all of the parties involved in it.
Like so many of these issues, it's a complex one with no easy answers.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can't you just see the systems at work here, like unintended consequences? I can almost see it on a chart, like you know, the way that they all interact. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, can we squeeze in one more? I'd love to hear.
Yeah.
Natiamu is going to ask us here from Kenya today.
Awesome.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, team. Thank you, Erika, for that conversation. That's been really intense. I think mine's more like just a relatable like view, because yesterday we attended this film festival and we were showcased this film. I'll paste it here, and it was around the copper mines in Zambia.
Mm-hmm.
So this may not be oil per se, but it's also just showing the complexity and just the effects that really the people on the ground are having, and the politics behind all this mining, right? Because at the end of the day, is the money that bigger corporations want, and taking away from the people who actually, these spaces, this land belong to them. And so it was really sad to watch this, because in one scene there is this men, you know, there's this completely two different areas where there is Zambia that is suffering with these mines, right? The people, and then there is where the money actually goes, which in this case was like Switzerland, Swiss, and it's beautiful and rich and green and everything is looking good there. And you see the differences. And there's this scene where people are, you know, trying to sell these mines and this, you know, people just like totally inconsiderate of what's happening on the ground. And on the ground, there's people in Zambia who are children coughing and dying of diseases because no one's taking care of them, you know, and that really hit hard because then what is the role we play here, knowing this is happening, right? And at the end of it all, nothing has been solved because it's in the hands of the politicians, it's in the hands of the people who have the money, and it's all about making more money and not really considering the people on the ground. So that is happening in a lot of countries in Africa. You know, we can talk about Congo, we can talk about all these places that are rich, blessed with all these minerals, but the people are suffering and suffering in a very inhumane way. So what can we do about that? And then also coming closer to home, I come from Kenya. Now we've discovered there's a bit of oil in Turkana. Turkana is one of those places in Kenya that's really beautiful. You can see Lake Turkana, and it has the indigenous pastoral communities of the Turkana community. But now the same thing is happening where it's no longer owned by the people, it's now owned by other corporations, foreign corporations that are coming in. And because our countries here in Africa are full of debt, all the politicians are trying to do is kind of try and sell whatever can be sold to try and pay debts that are never going to be paid and put people in total disaster. You know, it's literally a space of apathy, for lack of a better word. So I just wanted to mention that because it really hit me hard watching that film and just seeing how people are suffering also where we come from here. And so it's important to have these conversations and just, yeah, at least find a way to balance this off. So thank you.
Oh, no, thank you for bringing an international perspective to this too. My perspective is very North American oriented. And so I'm so grateful that you brought that up, because I think that is, it is very easy for those of us in this part of the world to ignore, you know, what we can't see. And that's kind of on me as like a journalist too, is to like bear witness to that and to tell tell people about those stories as well. But yeah, we have a legacy, a really terrible legacy of copper mining in the United States as well. And there's a town called Butte, Montana, which has like one of the largest open pit copper mines in the world, if not the largest. And it is so polluted, and the groundwater there is so polluted. You know, the town is covered with dust. That's also really terrible for the people who live there. And it is a Superfund. What in the United States is called a Superfund site, a site that, you know, in theory, a lot of federal money is going toward cleanup. And you go there and you're like, I don't know how that's ever going to happen. It's like I have photos could show you of that open pit mine, and it's, you know, it is shocking. But I'm excited. I'm going to watch that film now too. So thank you so much for sharing that.
All right, I said we were going to be done with Netanyahu, but Lister, do you want to be just the last word here for us and just get your last question in before we go to break?
Close. Yeah, thank you so much, sir. I mean, Erika's presentation is, it's really touching. As for me, her actions after discovering all that, they really matter to someone who's living in the global south. And actually, whilst people are running away from hydrocarbons and stuff, and people are really thinking about the lithium electric cars and lithium batteries. So here in the global south, there are so many lithium deposits, and Zimbabwe has one of the world's largest hard rock lithium deposits, and it's just a kilometer away from land owned by my mom. And there's been so much rush, much like the oil rush. There's a lot of mining there. And I think a few months ago, up to about a few months ago, it was the Chinese who were mining. And word says Elon Musk is eyeing for that lithium mine because it's been there for a very long time and stuff like that. So you find that the issues of land ownership are a mess. The mining itself is a mess, and the labor issues, they're also a mess. And when you talk about the environment, I really can't explain because I lived in that place. I literally saw and even now see the damage is doing, all that dirt that's coming out after taking out the lithium ore, they just dump it. And you have the Ministry of Environment, and they're not really working much around that. So yeah, it's also another challenge. Whilst we want to run away from hydrocarbons, the lithium also is creating challenges. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. I think that's probably that is like the next frontier of the next environmental challenge really is the lithium mining and how we do that in a way that's fair. Yeah, I don't know. Anyone else have answers on that? Because I don't, but I do think it is that I really appreciate you bringing it up because now I know a little bit more about it. And when I write about things like that, I can, include that, like, that Zimbabwe is part of this discussion too. And it's not, there are lithium mines in Oregon, the state that I live in too, or proposed lithium mines too. And I think now I will be able to, when people talk about it, say, and they are in other parts of the world where, where the environmental regulations might be different, or people might not have as much power about, around or wealth to fight it or to benefit even from its extraction as well. So thank you.
So the voice is changing here. Today is Sarah had to leave because one of these things that happened that fall the same day, the same time. Sarah is joining now as the guest speaker for an event that is happening in Brazil for people working in sustainability and entrepreneurs and large companies and how they're shifting their understanding in sustainability. So she had to run and she apologized for that. But both things were happening at the same time. Erika, thank you very much for coming, for agreeing to be here with us today. You're part of the community, so it's always good to have you back. I would like to propose we have a 5-minute break. On the way back, we're going to have conversations about cognitive dissonance and how we individually are addressing and processing this. So I think it's going to be an interesting conversation. I believe we all go through this every once in a while. Erika, you are welcome to stay. I'm not sure if you'll be able to stay with us and have this conversation as well. But feel free if you have to go, we understand as well. Okay.
Thank you.
So let's have a 5-minute break and then we'll be back at 18 past the hour or 48 past the hour, I think. All right. See you soon. Thank you. Okay. And Mark, thank you for reconnecting. I saw that you had to leave and reconnect here.
Never a problem. David's point was so good because I'm actually involved here in Minnesota, and I've always been a camper. All my 3 boys, my wife not so much. She's not so thrilled about it, but we always go up to we go up to Quetico to fish, and we go up to the Boundary Waters to enjoy the woods. Minnesota is the last boreal forest in the continental United States, and it will not be here probably before I die. In 20 more years, the boreal forest will be gone. And so we've already had the big fires that David talked about. Good sections of the boundary waters just burned to the ground about 8 years ago.
I think this is a good segue, Mark, for the conversation that we would like to propose that we have today. The idea is for us to be in breakout rooms and then to reflect on cognitive dissonance for us. I myself have to deal with that quite often. But at the same time, there's always someone that inspires me as being very clear and very well aligned in what they're doing and what their values are and all that. So I'm going to put on the chat some of the questions, but these are our prompts for conversation, to support conversations that you can have. So the idea is for you to take a couple of minutes and reflect on a few actions that you take and are congruent with your values. And if you want to list them, that's great. So first, what you feel and you understand that your actions are congruent with your values. Then go to the opposite, where your actions and your values are not congruent. If you can list them as well. And what thoughts would you be willing to change to achieve congruency, or what actions would you be willing to change to achieve congruency? And some of the explanations and reasoning that we use either for ourselves or to others when we are not congruent, and that we say, oh, but other people do worse than I do, or I'm not doing as bad as the people in another country are doing, so, or I give up so much. There are multiple reasons that I use. How does recognizing the incongruence in ourselves help us build empathy and understanding when we see that happening in others? And lastly, how do you believe this incongruency impacts your agency and things that you are currently doing? Okay, so let me put here on the chat, if you prefer to copy and have this on your computer, maybe putting on Word or any note-taking that you use on your computer, I'm going to send it. And then we're going to take about 25 minutes to talk about this, and then we come back and then we debrief with the group. Is that okay? Yep. Okay. So I'm opening the rooms. Yeah, thank you, Arlene. Any other reflections? Anything that you're really proud that is congruent and that makes you feel like, okay, I'm living my daily life and it's all good, and having those moments of joy that are congruent?
Well, I was just so inspired by the people in our group who were sharing all the things that they're doing, you know, from growing their own fruits and vegetables and riding bikes and not doing much flying, and amazing. So it was very inspirational to hear about that.
Nice. Thank you, Debbie. Luis?
Well, I think these kinds of questions are very, very great for all of us. I think that all of us, we have different learning styles, and we are in different learning processes about some, I don't know, fields. So I'm trying to build empathy with the people who act maybe different than me. makes me to understand, for example, now I am a little, a real, really beginner about climate, but what about before that? Maybe I think different. So now maybe I understand more about these kinds of things. So I am trying to act and think in different way. So there are people who maybe doesn't know anything like me in one moment. So maybe we need to practice what now we know, and maybe we need to help others with theory, with I don't know, some explanations. I don't know, maybe find different scenarios and opportunities to apply what now we think understand better. So thank you for these questions.
Thank you, Luis, for sharing. And Carlos, I saw you unmuted yourself, and so if you want to comment something, and then we go to Lister.
Yeah, I guess real quick, I learned systems thinking, system dynamics many years ago, and I feel like mostly I've used them to help, companies and organizations and do different things, mostly private sector stuff. So I'm thankful for the opportunity to share a little bit of that with Common Earth. So because it gives me a way to solve that cognitive dissonance of having a skill that I wasn't really using for what it its full potential, I guess.
Nice. Love that. Thank you, Carlos. Lister?
Yeah, I was actually sharing with my group that for an average global South person, I'll give my example. In my experience, you just have mixed feelings sometimes, because I was just sharing how an average African person is waiting to experience their first flight, or when you buy your first car, it calls for the whole village to celebrate. And there's a time actually when you say you are successful, you are graduating from living away from the farm and going into a city where you don't do anything eco-friendly and stuff like that. So now when having this knowledge about issues of climate change and really taking them into consideration, sometimes when you just go on this long bus ride, maybe from Tanzania to South Africa, you just have this guilt conscience, much like someone who's eaten chocolate and they want to lose weight. Yeah, but then so you just end up really going in there, and no matter the backlash you might get here, you just have to go in maybe and concentrate on a little corner. Maybe you look at carbon emissions in industries, and maybe talking to people, your peers in the cities, talking about regenerative agriculture and sustainable waste management issues and stuff like that. Yeah, it scrapes some guilt off.
Yeah. Thank you, Lister. Naitiamo, it's now 3, so if you could add something, but we'll have to be brief. Sorry.
Yeah, quick. I just wanted to comment on what Lisa was saying, because it's funny how, yes, like now we're very conscious about what eco is, but when you go back to our traditions, especially like if you just go to the village, everything is eco, and now eco has got to be a little soap that's so expensive, and all this stuff that doesn't even make any sense, and when you go back to the village, they're just living an eco life from the beginning. So it's just a rather interesting it's ironic. Yeah.
Paradox. Yes. Thank you, Naitiamo. Thank you all for coming today, for joining the conversations, and it's always rewarding to see you all and experience this together. Yeah, so the next one is going to be on September 16th. And the aim is for us to talk about trees. Let's see how that's going to play out. Okay. Have a great end of the day, or very end of the day, afternoon, you all, and see you next time.
Bye, everyone.